So starting out, drones or unmanned aircraft have been a hot topic in the last couple of years. Really, to put in perspective of how quickly this industry has grown, DJI, who is really the #1 manufacturer, they have 75% of the global market share, has been around for less than 10 years as a company. So this industry really has grown very quickly, and the governmental regulation side has taken a while to catch up, as to be expected. Some folks have said the FAA has moved very slowly in that integration process. However, when you look at the scope of what they're dealing with, they really have done a good job to try to put this framework together. I have my numbers probably not 100% correct, but before unmanned aircrafts really popped up in the national airspace, there were 250,000 manned aircrafts in the United States. They're estimating that by 2020, over 5 billion unmanned aircrafts are going to have been sold. So that's everything from your small hobbyist, go pick it up at Walmart type of application, all the way up to your professional side. But the scope that they're dealing with is quite large. So we look at unmanned aircrafts and we think, okay, what different capabilities and technologies are out there that we can use to collect different types of data? So here's some examples of some different imagery data points that can be taken from an unmanned aircraft. You have your standard imagery. You can collect video on scene and what you can use later. Thermal imagery through FLIR and other capabilities of different cameras that are out there. So IR monitoring. We get then to air monitoring, which is something that has really started to grow recently. The science and research behind the effectiveness of air monitoring from an unmanned aircraft is really just starting to be proven and becoming a valuable tool. We have LiDAR mapping for more of the engineering side, creating 3D point clouds for both civil, road construction, a lot of different applications, creating those point clouds, really more of a scientific-based data collection. Then there's very heavy zoom cameras out there that can allow you to allow you to stand off a long distance from a situation and zoom right in. So there's a lot of different cameras out there, a lot of different technology, a lot of different sensors that we can start to fly on these platforms, which really shape the industry and what you can use the technology for. I like to break really the aircraft themselves up into 2 categories. And this is really important when you start to decide, when you're developing a program, which route you go. If we look at the public safety sector, we're going to be more on the multi-rotor side because you're doing things like incident size up, search and rescue, really smaller area applications in most day-to-day operations. When we look more to the governmental Department of Transportation's, Department of Natural Resources, or land management-driven applications, we can start to see the value in fixed wings because typically they deal with larger areas. A fleet could consist of both multi-rotors and fixed-wing aircraft, but it really depends on ultimately what application you're targeting. Price points on these aircraft start out very affordable and they can go up pretty high. So really whatever you can scale up your program at a lot of different levels. But deciding which route you're going to go, whether it's a multi-rotor or a fixed wing, is really important as you start to develop your program. We can look at a lot of different tactical use cases, and I think if we all sat here today, we could come up with a lot more tactical use cases or use cases in general for unmanned aircraft. But just to kind of start to paint a picture, I have about 5 or 6 examples that we're going to go through, from emergency management to road commission support, flooding and floodplain analysis, situational awareness. Really the possibilities on these use cases really are very expansive depending on your industry. And I think we have a pretty broad spectrum on this webinar today. It looks like both from Department of Transportation to the public safety sector. So each of these applications will be a little different for each of your individual use cases. So this first example on the right-hand side is a search and rescue application. or a subject apprehension using a FLIR camera. This was a drill that we did just to show some of the capabilities of how you can lock on to a target using some of the filters available on the infrared cameras. The example on the left is a fire application out of Joshua, Texas. They were one of the first fire departments in the nation to utilize the technology. And they were fighting this fire from the front left side before they put the aircraft in the air. Then they realized that really the fire was up towards the center, and there was a hot spot there that they could find using that. So this technology is not a penetrating technology, but it does give you that surface level temperature, which will help you gain information on scene. Our next example is a tornado in Allegan County, Michigan. For this example, we provided some general video, but we also provided a 3D point cloud for the target region of all the debris to be able to show how much debris was there and what type of equipment was going to be needed to take that debris out after the fact. Kind of the keynote part of this example that we did was the aircraft actually found an area up to the northwest, about a half a mile away, of a couple acre parcel of trees that were eliminated, taken down by the tornado. The tornado first touched down there. When NOAA came out to do their initial size up, or the National Weather Service, they did actually not see that patch of trees that were down. So this showed us that this technology can really find areas very quickly. There was no life safety issue in that situation. However, it can help you size up an area or a damage assessment very quickly. The next example I'm going to show is using thermal imagery for search and rescue, as well as this is an ice rescue situation. On the left side, you'll see the thermal imagery, and on the right side, you'll see the standard imagery. If we rewind these videos, though, to the start, you'll see that when the diver jumps through the ice, you do lose thermal visibility. So I like to show this slide just to show that there are limitations of this technology. It's not a ground penetrating. It cannot penetrate the surface to determine temperature. It's only a surface level temperature assessment. It's great for search and rescue because of the filters that you can set that have those body temperatures pop out. It's great for wildland forest fighting because in that case you can find hot spots as well as regular firefighting, but it is just a surface-based temperature reading. It's not a penetrating technology. Next example is talking about infrastructure inspection in Grand Rapids. We flew this for the civil engineering team last winter. There were some ice buildups along some of the bridges and in the dam area that they were concerned about doing structural damage. So we flew this to show them where some of their problem spots were around the bridges, checking out some of the debris fields, and really giving them a better picture of what was going on out there. So this was a way to get to those troubled, hard to reach areas without risking personnel's safety doing so. This example is showing some of the zoom capabilities that are out there today. This aircraft is located about 1 mile away from this facility that we're zooming in on at 400 feet, which is the legal ceiling currently for unmanned aircraft. This is about the range that you can have with these cameras, which is pretty remarkable how far they will zoom in. Next example, again, focused on the zoom capabilities, but this is about a half a mile from that water tower. You can see we can zoom right in on cars. It would be difficult to read a license plate at this distance, but not out of the question. Definitely can see people moving around if they were in that image. You can lock onto vehicles, lock onto other objects. These aircraft do have features where you can active track, where not only lock on with the camera to a moving object, but also lock on with the whole aircraft. So you can basically set it up to follow a person or a vehicle if that was needed on some type of active situation. We can then switch our mindset to what imagery we collect on site, and then we also can switch to how can we collect data that we can process and use later. So this is an investigation example of a fire in the Grand Rapids area last year. This is actually state police imagery, and they had a firefighter injury on this site, and so they wanted to collect some data about the flow path and really get a better picture of what occurred there. So they flew this area. It was just a small fire, took some imagery from above, and were able to then measure on it and use some geospatial principles of the imagery to help them through their fire investigation. This is an example of an aggregate site for the Department of Natural Resources in Michigan, just south of Jackson. They have this site leased on a contract currently, and they do not have a great way of measuring and monitoring how much aggregate the contractor has pulled out of this site. So what we did for them was we flew this and created a 3D point cloud and estimated how much cut and fill volume had been removed from that site, and compared that to some generic GIS data, historical GIS data, and created some estimates for them. The accuracies will come hopefully in a couple months when we fly this again. Now that we have a starting point model, we'll be able to fly that again and create, actually have some data points to verify. But we're estimating within a few percent that we were able to estimate that cut and fill volume. There are some steps needed to enhance your accuracies, including placing ground control points throughout that whole data map, so when you post-process, you have something to reference from. So this is a more higher level application. This is not just to grab the unit out of the box, throw it in the air, and start collecting data. You do have to have a process to ensure your accuracies. This example was out of Lake County, Florida. It was a 150-acre parcel where they were working to restore that parcel back to its natural habitat. It was an orange grove, and they were trying to monitor through that restoration process and document the work that they had been doing. The reason I like to show this example is because even on a 150-acre parcel, you're able to maintain that high-resolution imagery through a number of software packages available today. What you do in this case is you will fly this area on a pre-programmed flight path. You'll collect a bunch of automated data, a bunch of images, and then you'll use a software package to basically stitch all that imagery together to maintain that high-resolution image. Now, in this case, this image actually became about a 20 gig file, so it's very hard to maneuver around. But if you were pulling it into a GIS application where you're actually monitoring things, it's very, very handy. In this case, with that 20 gig file, they use ArcGIS to overlay and track different aspects of their ecosystem. But this can be done on a disaster setting. It could be done like we showed with the point cloud for the aggregate site. So really, the use cases can go very extensive on this type of automated mapping. Another example of that automated mapping is we can take those images and overlay floor plans, blueprints, any emergency plans that exist on a site, and preserve that geospatial principle. So there's some ways to do that out there, and you can, after you overlay, you can re-export this information back to a PDF map viewer, and actually, such as on a tablet, walk around and see where you're at in any of that imagery, which really provides a great tool in an emergency situation. Talk a little bit about hazmat support and air monitoring. This is something that's definitely growing, and I think a lot of research is continuing to be done in this field. You'll see a lot more systems coming out in the upcoming months. I think this is one of the biggest growth opportunities in the unmanned aircraft field currently, for how long it really takes to deploy a hazmat team, putting them in level A suits and started to collect that data. When you can go to an active situation and deploy your aircraft quickly and efficiently, you can start collecting data while your team is getting ready, providing information that's critical to that incident response. This is for the 51st Civil Support Team's Weapons of Mass Destruction recertification event with the National Guard last October here in Michigan, where we flew for them and started helping them provide some insights about what they could see and use out of these unmanned aircraft systems. We're now going to make a bit of a shift into the policy and procedures side. I apologize, this is the little more drier portion of the section, but definitely important information to know as you're starting to launch your program. So first, the hot topic of, am I required to register my aircraft? So whether you're doing this as a hobbyist, whether you're doing this under any of the current regulations, governmental sector, the answer is yes. Now everyone is required to register their unmanned aircraft if it weighs between a half a pound and 55 pounds. There was some contention last June. This got overturned, and actually if you were just a recreational flyer, you no longer had to register. A federal appeals court again in December overturned it again, and now everyone will have to re-register their aircraft. So I believe that date is fastly approaching, end of February, first part of March, where that's going to technically take effect again. So in all theory, all applications right now, anyone who's flying an unmanned aircraft between 0.55 pounds and 55 do have to register. The cost is $5 for 3 years, and you do that on registermyuas.gov. Before August of 2016, the only way to fly an unmanned aircraft as a public entity or the commercial entity was to go through the Section 333 and then the civil/public COA process. This process was highly restrictive. It took anywhere between 90 to 180 days to accomplish, and you had to be a manned aircraft pilot for them to grant approval for that process. In August of 2016, the FAA rolled out the Part 107 regulatory framework for UAS operations, which really opened the door to commercial operations. I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in a minute. But August 2016 is really the big date of how this industry was blown wide open on the commercial sector. There's still a long ways to go. They have restrictions right now for operations over people. You have to maintain visual line of sight of your aircraft at all times, and some other operational parameters that are still governing the industry that they hope to work towards integration into the national airspace in the future. They were expecting by late 2016 to have those operations over people hashed out, as well as expanded operations. However, we have a long ways to go. I think by their target is 2025, but I think it's going to be further out from there before they really get these things fully integrated into the national airspace. So currently, right now, there are 4 different ways to legally fly. First of all, you have your Section 336 for recreational operations. This is your everyday hobbyist that is flying for fun, not commercially, not for money, not for hire, and not the public sector. So under this set of operational guidelines, the pilot has to be flying by a set of community-based safety standards recognized nationwide. So that could be a model aircraft association. And those are just going to provide general operating parameters such as daytime only, under 400 feet, give way to manned aircraft, notify an airport if you're within 5 miles. Just some very general basic principles. But those are important. You have to be operating under those safety standards. We then have the Section 333 and the Civil COA. The FAA has really worked to phase this out over time. This is the original way that a commercial sector would get licensed to fly, but they're working on getting that out and really trying to roll everything into the Part 107. Now, for the public sector, we still have the public COA, which we'll get into detail about that shortly. But for the commercial sector, they've really tried to phase out that Civil COA. We then have the 14 CFR Part 107, which is that new regulatory framework that they rolled out in August of 2016. This allows a remote pilot to go and take a knowledge test. Once they've proven their knowledge, they are given a list of general operating criteria, which we'll cover on the next slide. Lastly, we have the public COA, which we can look at on the front end as a lot longer process than the Part 107 for the public sector to fly. However, it does allow the public sector to develop their own policies and procedures, identify their mission criteria, their training standards, and be granted as a program for the whole agency or department to fly. It also allows the public entity to develop LOAs or MOUs, so letter of agreements or memorandums of understanding with your local airport authorities, and really gives you more latitude moving forward. Unfortunately, right now, the Part 107 is so swamped with the commercial sector that they've not been able to set any priority for the public sector. So the public COA is really the better way to go in a lot of applications for any public entity. So we're going to go back to the Part 107. The Part 107 is really the new standard for the commercial sector, but also the public sector can fly into the 107 even while they're waiting for their COA. So starting out, a pilot will go and he'll take a knowledge test. That pilot can get that information for that knowledge test however they want. So Alpha Consulting, we offer a course, hands-on and flight school. However, there's a lot of places online to take that. Those prereqs, it's not really prereqs, but you can self-study. You can find that information in a lot of places. Under the Part 107, once you get that and pass that knowledge test, you're given a list of general operating criteria. And those are things like must maintain visual line of sight of your aircraft, cannot fly over people, only can fly during the day, have to keep your operations under 400 feet, some weather visibility requirements, Class G airspace, which is pretty much general airspace not in controlled, and then no operations from moving vehicle unless it's in a sparsely populated area, as well as a couple other things. If you would like to violate or go against any of those things, like for a public safety operation, you're going to be flying at night in a lot of situations, or you could be flying in a controlled airspace. You can then go through a waiver process to get permission to do so. I'm going to kind of compare the COA, though, versus the waiver process or the Part 107. To put it in perspective, timeline-wise, the FAA is shooting for a 90-day turnaround on a Part 107 waiver request. I still have waivers out from about 6 months ago waiting to be approved for agencies and departments. The COA process used to take a lot longer, and I just pushed 3 through the FAA actually in about 3 to 4 weeks. So the COA timeline actually has sped up quite a bit because it's kind of taken some pressure off of it when the 107 got rolled out. But the big difference between the COA and the Part 107 is through the COA process, you define all of those operational parameters on the front side. So things like nighttime operations, you build that all into the front of the COA process, and then it gets approved as one blanket program. The 107 you can kind of view as a bit of a piecemeal operation where you get your pilot's license, then you go through a case-by-case waiver process to say, okay, we want to fly at night, submit a waiver for it. Okay, we want to fly in Class G airspace, have to submit a separate waiver for that. So all of those other things you have to kind of submit on a case-by-case basis. The other big categories here are training, whereas under the Part 107, there is a training standard, and that's you have to pass the knowledge test. Under the COA, the department can self-certify and create their own training standards to have internal training programs and not have to go take that knowledge test. Also, liability and responsibility is very up in the air about where that's going to fall, whether it's going to fall on the department or the individual pilot. Under the Part 107, you are a civil operator in the national airspace. You're not a public agent, public entity when you're actually the pilot. There's not a ton of case law out there today that shows where that's going to head. This slide is just to show that there's complications in all airspace in most jurisdictions. It's important to consult your sectional charts when you're launching the program to really find out where and what airports you have, what issues you might have when you start to operate. And when you start identifying things like the COA process and the Part 107, you'll get a little bit more knowledge about the different airports and such in your area. hot topic in a lot of legislative bodies right now. We have a pretty diverse body on this webinar from across the country, it looks like. But here in Michigan, I just have a couple things. We had a task force that got created last January of 2017. They met to start to identify some of the opportunities and concerns that the FAA was not addressing by the legislative bodies in Michigan. They have made their recommendations to the bodies, and we'll see what comes of that. One thing that did come of that was a MOU bill, House Bill 5118 in Michigan, which would create a MOU between the local agencies for enforcement and the FAA to be able to enforce federal aeronautics code. Currently, the only way for enforcement to happen of any of these unmanned laws is for the FAA to do that enforcement, and they provided a documentation process for those agencies, essentially. Skip too many there. In November of this year, the Department of Transportation rolled out the UAS Pilot Integration Program. This program was driven to help expedite some of these processes that have taken a long time to get up and rolling. Things like beyond visual line of sight, operations over people, all things that need to be tested and worked through, but that really have not advanced as quick as they'd like. So this process, they've decided they're going to pick a minimum of 5 applicants. The applicants had to be a state or local agency, but that state and local agency could put together whatever type of team they wanted to under their application. It was a very aggressive application and implementation timeline. The application process has closed, and there are a lot of applications in right now. So in Michigan, the Department of Transportation headed this process up. They pulled together the state agencies as well as a lot of different private sector agencies, and we hope to see something good coming out of this in the advancement of the industry in the next couple months. The FAA has decided they're going to decide those applicants by May, and hope to jump in after that to move things along and forward. The last technology I just want to make people aware of is the live stream broadcast capabilities from these unmanned aircraft. There are a lot of different applications out there. This example is with KSI Data Sciences, where they have a secure environment, kind of like a go-to-meeting application that you can log in remotely and see what's going on a situation or through a portal from the unmanned aircraft. You can also do this through Facebook Live, and the marketing folks do a lot of things in that regard. We do it as well, where we'll throw something up on Facebook Live stream from the aircraft. But there's a lot of secure and unsecured technologies available out there to achieve this video transfer, both locally at a situation, on a geographical place, or if you were trying to get it up to the cloud or to a secure server. The last slide that I'd like to show actually is Michigan's Emergency Management Homeland Security's informational bulletin on the unmanned aircraft being on the FEMA controlled list. Essentially, good or bad, the aircraft are currently on the FEMA controlled list, and so they cannot be purchased without state approval under the Homeland Security Emergency Management grants. However, recent legislation from the current administration has overturned that, and we hope by May that will come off the FEMA control list. In Michigan, it was quite the extensive process for folks to use Homeland Security money to purchase these. However, it is going to change here in the next couple months. So if grant funding through emergency management is something you're looking into, know that those restrictions are going to continue to get eased as time goes on here. Those items on the screen are just the different categories that the unmanned aircraft can fall into. So that is all the information I have for us this morning. I will be here for a little bit. If anyone has any questions, I unlocked the audio, and so if you can either speak that way or type them in if you have any, and if not, I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for joining us. We are Alpha Consulting Group, and if you have any further questions as well after this, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you more about what we do, or learn about what you guys do in each of your applications.
No, I took down the Michigan stuff too on top of it, because this is just going to progressively get more detailed, more based on stuff. What's your question?
I'm just asking if we should go for the COA as well as the Part 107 waiver, or is Part 107 just enough?
So the question was, we applied for a Part 107 waiver at the Sheriff's Department in Northern Indiana. Should we also apply for the COA as well? So I've had a number of departments that have done both. The COA ultimately is going to give you more leeway from the standpoint of if you were to mutual aid someplace else and you get access to a certain airspace, if you have a COA, it opens up something called the emergency call hotline, which is a 24/7 staffed line by the FAA, focusing on the public safety sector. It allows you to, say you were mutual aiding somebody in a different airspace or close to somebody else's airport outside of your jurisdiction. It allows you that possibility basically to get that airspace quicker. It also allows you to talk directly to air traffic control. So I don't know where at in Indiana you guys are at, if you have any controlled facilities, but if for some reason you needed to deviate from that 107 waiver, the COA have a direct conversation with that air traffic authority. Now, in all reality, right now, if you need to get in someplace and the air traffic air traffic has been good about helping with that process, but technically speaking, from the FAA side, air traffic is not supposed to deviate at all from those waivers, where the COA allows that conversation to kind of occur. So really, whatever route you had, both are good, but the COA gives you more long-term kind of expansive potential.
So we'll need to look at doing that probably. Not to mention, I like that the liability then falls on the agency, not on the pilot.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's something that layman understands right now.
I don't understand why somebody's going to go and do construction on a house.
Alrighty, well, if we have no more questions, I really appreciate all of your time, and please let us know if we can answer anything else for you. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.